My name is Clinton, and I'm 28. The air in my auto shop in Rosewood, Oregon, is thick and heavy, smelling of machine oil, hot metal, and something else, an elusive scent of old wood and bygone years. It's the smell of a legacy. The shop, which I named Michael's Motors, isn't just a business, it's a sanctuary. Today, a fine Oregon drizzle is falling, drumming a soothing rhythm on the tin roof. I'm sitting at the old workbench that once belonged to my grandfather, Michael, sifting through a box of his tools. It's not the first time I've done this. Every chisel, every plane, every handle polished smooth by his palms is a relic. My fingers, calloused from working on engines and stained with a grease that no longer washes off, brush against something small and smooth at the bottom of the box. It's a tiny wooden bird, a hummingbird, frozen in flight. I remember when my grandfather carved it years ago, sitting on the porch of his house right here in Rosewood. His hands, gnarled with arthritis but still incredibly precise, turned a lifeless piece of maple into a fluttering wonder. Everything should have a soul in it, Clinton, he told me then, handing me the bird. Otherwise, it's just junk. I cupped the hummingbird in my palm, its smooth surface cool against my skin, and the chill seeped straight into my heart, triggering the mechanism of memory. I am here, in this small town where everyone knows each other by name, where time seems to flow more slowly, and where a man's worth is measured not by his bank account, but by the strength of his handshake. But I am not here because I chose to be from the start. I am here because one day I had to make a choice that tore my life into a before and an after. The rain outside intensifies, washing the dust from the asphalt and carrying my thoughts away to another life, another city. Seattle, a city of glass and steel, forever striving for the future, where the past is just data on a server that can be erased. There, in an elegant suburb overlooking Lake Washington, still stands my parents' house, a monument to the success of my father, Richard. And it was there that my journey to this quiet harbor began, away from the family I once called my own. I look at the wooden bird, and the walls of the workshop dissolve. Before me is not a dusty workbench, but a mahogany dining table polished to a mirror shine in my parents' house. And I am that 20-year-old kid again, who doesn't yet know that the most important battle of his life will not be for a career or money, but for the soul of one old man. This little bird is my ticket to the past. And today, to the sound of the rain, I am ready to take that journey again. Not to judge or to blame, but to remember. To never forget how I became the man I am, and the price I paid for it. Life in Seattle was like the perfectly calibrated mechanism of an expensive car. Everything ran smoothly, looked impressive, but was devoid of warmth. Our house in Bellevue was a work of architectural art, panoramic windows, minimalist design, a smart home system that controlled the lights and temperature on a schedule. My father, Richard, was a vice president at a major tech corporation. He was a man of the future, always talking about disruptive technologies, quarterly reports, and strategic planning. His love was also strategic. He paid for my tuition at a college of engineering, not because he wanted me to be a happy engineer, but because it was a promising and respectable career. When, in my third year, I announced I was dropping out to work as a mechanic in a small garage, he looked at me as if I had confessed to treason. "A mechanic?" he asked, his voice ringing with cold metal. "Clinton, do you want to dig around in grease for the rest of your life? After everything we've invested in you? That's not ambition, that's surrender." To him, my passion for engines, for the feeling of bringing a complex mechanism back to life with my own hands, was something shameful, plebeian. My mother, Eleanor, was the perfect complement to my father. Her life revolved around charity galas, art galleries, and maintaining our family's flawless facade. She was beautiful, elegant, and completely empty inside. Her care manifested in buying me expensive sweaters I never wore, and in constant reminders of how important it was to keep up appearances. My younger sister, Sarah, was their successful project. She excelled in business school, interned at my father's partner companies, and repeated their mantras of success and efficiency. We barely spoke. We lived in different universes, though under the same roof. The only window into another, real world for me was my grandfather, Michael. After my grandmother's death, he lived alone in his old house here in Rosewood, but often came to visit us in Seattle. He was the complete opposite of my father. Michael was a carpenter, a craftsman whose hands created things that lasted for decades. He smelled of wood shavings and varnish, not expensive cologne. He taught me not strategic planning, but how to hold a hammer correctly, how to feel the wood, how to see the beauty in simplicity. Your father builds empires in the clouds, he would say when we sat in his old workshop, and I build chairs you can actually sit on. Feel the difference. I felt it. I could breathe deeply around him. He was the one who gave me my first set of tools and encouraged my fascination with mechanics. He saw craftsmanship in it, not dirt. He was the only person in the family who saw me, not the project, Clinton. The first signs of his illness appeared subtly. First, he began to forget names. Then he would ask the same question several times. One night, he called me from Rosewood in a full-blown panic because he couldn't remember how to use the phone to call a taxi. After that, my father, reluctantly and after much persuasion from my mother, because what will people say, convinced him to move in with us in Seattle. His old house in Rosewood was locked up, and my grandfather found himself trapped in our sterile aquarium. At first, everything went smoothly. Eleanor hired a part-time caregiver, and Richard bought my grandfather the latest tablet with memory exercises. But it was just an act. Dementia didn't fit into their perfect world. It was inefficient, unpredictable, and worst of all, unappealing. And with each passing day, the crack between their world and my grandfather's reality widened, becoming a chasm on the edge of which I stood, desperately trying to keep him from falling. My grandfather's move into our Seattle home initially resembled a well-staged play titled The Caring Family. My mother enthusiastically told her friends at the golf club how important it was to care for one's elders, and even organized a small fundraiser for an Alzheimer's research foundation. My father took a few photos with Grandpa for the family album, both wearing identical cashmere sweaters my mother had chosen. But a completely different drama was unfolding behind the scenes. Grandpa, torn from the familiar environment of his Rosewood home, was fading before my eyes. He wandered through our huge house like a ghost, confusedly touching the cold glass surfaces and abstract paintings on the walls. He often called for my grandmother, forgetting she had been gone for years. His world shrank to a small room filled with items from his past life that I had helped him move, an old rocking chair, photos in wooden frames, that same box of tools. For my parents, his illness was not a tragedy, but a series of domestic inconveniences. My mother grew irritated when he spilled soup on the pristine white tablecloth. My father got angry when Grandpa started talking to him in the middle of an important video call. Their patience, so abundant in public, wore thin with frightening speed at home. I became his only real companion. In the evenings, after work at the garage, I would go to his room. We would silently fix an old radio or just sit together while he told fragmented stories of his youth, of building bridges in Oregon, of how he met my grandmother. Sometimes he would call me Sam, the name of his best friend, and I wouldn't correct him. In those moments, he was calm and happy, and that was all that mattered. The point of no return was one of the dinner parties my mother loved to host. That evening, we had guests, my father's business partner and his wife. Everything was going according to script. Expensive wines, exquisite dishes, conversations about the stock market and vacation plans in Tuscany. Grandpa sat at the head of the table, quiet and detached. My mother had asked me to make sure he behaved himself. At one point, as my father was enthusiastically describing the prospects of a new neural network, my grandfather suddenly stood up. He walked over to the partner's wife, an elegant lady dripping in diamonds, took her hand, and asked with a completely serious face, "Mary, dear, have you seen my chisels? I need to finish the leg for that table." A deafening silence fell over the room. The woman snatched her hand back in fright. My mother's face turned white as a sheet, and a mask of icy fury froze on my father's face. I quickly went to my grandfather, gently took his arm, and said, "Grandpa, let's go. I'll help you look. We probably left them in your room." I led him away under the sympathetic and curious gazes of the guests. When I returned, the dinner was continuing, but the atmosphere was poisoned. Later, after the guests had left, my father was waiting for me in the living room. He didn't shout. His voice was quiet and sharp, like a scalpel. "That was the last straw, Clinton," he said. "I cannot let him destroy everything I've spent years building. My reputation, my connections. He is a walking problem, and this problem needs to be solved." In his eyes, I saw not a shred of compassion for his own father, only cold calculation and annoyance. He looked at my grandfather not as a sick man, but as a glitch in the system that needed to be eliminated. That night, I sat in my grandfather's room for a long time. He was already asleep, snoring softly in his chair. On his nightstand lay that same wooden hummingbird. I realized that war had been declared, and the battlefield would be the soul of this old, confused man. And I was the only soldier on his side. The solution to the problem, as my father put it, was not long in coming. A couple of weeks later, my mother announced that we were throwing a big party for my grandfather's 75th birthday. "It'll be a surprise," she chirped, waving a guest list. "We'll gather all his old friends we can find, the family. He needs to feel our love and care." I knew immediately it was a lie. In my parents' vocabulary, love and care were synonyms for control and manipulation. On the day of the party, our house was turned into an exhibition hall. A catering service set up tables with appetizers, and waiters served champagne. Aunt Martha arrived from California with her husband, and some distant cousins flew in. It was loud, fake, and unbearably sad. My grandfather sat at the center of this circus in a new, scratchy-looking jacket my mother had bought him. He smiled confusedly as strangers approached him, slapped him on the back, and spoke loud, empty words. I stood by his side, trying to be his shield, explaining who was who and gently leading him away from the most intrusive guests. The climax of the evening came after everyone had sung Happy Birthday. My father cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. He gave a touching speech about what a wonderful father and grandfather Michael was, how much he had done for everyone, and how it was now our duty to take care of him. The words were right, but they sounded like a report at a board of directors meeting. And then he pulled several sheets of paper from a folder. "Dad," he said, approaching my grandfather with a pen, "this is just a formality, so that your mother and I can help you with your bills, with your doctors. Just sign here. It's a power of attorney. It will make things easier for everyone." My grandfather looked at the papers, then at my father, bewildered. His gaze was cloudy, but a flicker of fear crossed it. He instinctively sensed a trap. He looked at me, and in his eyes was a silent plea for help. And I couldn't take it anymore. "Wait," I said, stepping forward and placing a hand on my father's shoulder. "I don't think this is the right time for this." My father slowly turned his head. His smile vanished, leaving a mask of icy contempt on his face. "Clinton, stay out of this," he hissed, so only I could hear. "This is none of your business." "It's Grandpa's business," I replied, louder this time, so the others could hear. "And he doesn't seem to want to sign anything. Maybe we should respect his wishes." The air in the room thickened. The guests fell silent, watching the unfolding scene with curiosity. Aunt Martha shook her head disapprovingly. My mother shot me a withering glare. "Clinton's right," my grandfather said unexpectedly. His voice was quiet but firm. "I'm not signing. I want to go home." "Dad, you are home," my mother said soothingly, approaching him. "No," he shook his head. "I want to go to my home. In Rosewood." It was tantamount to a bomb exploding. The party was ruined. My father, purple with rage, crumpled the papers and stormed out of the room. The guests began to say their hasty goodbyes. When everyone was gone, I was left alone in the living room with my parents. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" my father yelled, no longer holding back. "You humiliated me in front of the whole family. You're turning him against us." "I was just protecting him," I shouted back. "You were trying to trick him into signing papers so you could do whatever you wanted with him later." "We were trying to help him," my mother shrieked. "He's sick. He can't make decisions for himself. Someone has to take responsibility." "Then take it." I glanced around their luxurious, soulless living room. But responsibility isn't about taking away the last thing a man has left, his will. That night, I knew they wouldn't stop. They had lost this battle, but not the war. And their next move would be far more insidious and cruel. I had to be on my guard. After the disastrous birthday party, the atmosphere in the house became not just tense, it became glacial. My parents barely spoke to me, limiting their communication to short, sharp orders or sarcastic remarks. But the full weight of their anger and disappointment fell on my grandfather. Their care turned into open terror. They treated him not like a sick man, but like a prisoner who had done something wrong. My mother fired the caregiver, claiming she was spoiling him too much. Now she dispensed his medications herself, monitoring every pill with the air of a prison warden. My father forbade him from leaving the house alone, even to go into the garden. He could fall, get lost. "It's for his own safety," He explained to me with a stone-faced expression, but I saw only the desire to completely isolate Grandpa from the outside world in his eyes. The worst part was that they started locking his bedroom door at night. He wanders at night, my mother said when I caught her in the act. He could turn on the stove or open the front door. We can't take that risk. I stood before that locked door, clenching my fists until my knuckles turned white, feeling utterly powerless. I tried to protest, to argue, but I hit a brick wall of their ironclad righteousness. Clinton, you don't understand anything about caring for patients like him. My father cut me off. We've consulted with specialists. These are necessary measures. I knew they were lying. They hadn't consulted with anyone but their own cruelty and selfishness. Grandpa withdrew even further into himself. He almost stopped talking, sitting for hours in his chair, staring at a single spot. Sometimes I would find him crying quietly. When I asked what was wrong, he would just shake his head and whisper, "I'm in prison, Sam. They're keeping me in prison." My heart was breaking. I tried to spend as much time with him as possible. I brought him books he loved in his youth, played old music for him. I bought him a wood carving set, and sometimes he managed to carve simple figures, but his hands trembled more and more. My sister Sarah, who came home from college on weekends, pretended not to notice anything. She was so absorbed in her ambitious plans that the tragedy unfolding in her own home was just an annoying background noise to her. One late evening, I was going down to the kitchen for water and heard my parents' hushed voices from my father's office. The door was ajar. I froze, listening. "It's the best option, Richard," my mother was saying. "Emerald Meadows. Excellent reviews, top-class medical staff. It's not far, only a 2-hour drive. We could visit him on weekends." "And what does it cost?" my father asked. I didn't catch the amount my mother named, but I heard my father whistle. "That's expensive, Eleanor. But I think selling his house in Rosewood would cover the costs for a few years. And we can't sell the house without the power of attorney. Then we need to find another way." My mother's voice hardened. "We can't live like this anymore. He's driving me insane. We need to act, and act quickly, before he does something else." I staggered back from the door, the blood freezing in my veins. Emerald Meadows. It sounded like the name of a paradise garden, but I knew that for my grandfather, it would be hell. They didn't just want to get rid of him. They wanted to use his assets to pay for his exile. The plan was cynical and monstrous in its simplicity. I crept back to my room, sat on my bed, and started to shake. I could no longer be a passive observer. I had to do something. I had no plan, no allies. All I had was a desperate desire to save the only person I truly loved from the clutches of those who should have loved him most. A week after the overheard conversation, my parents changed their tactics. The icy coldness vanished, replaced by a sickeningly sweet, unnatural kindness. One evening at dinner, my mother announced with a radiant smile, "I have wonderful news. Richard has a few days off, and I thought we could all use a break. We're going to Quiet Cove for the weekend. It's a wonderful resort on the coast, pine forests, the ocean. The fresh air will do Dad a world of good." My father immediately supported her. "Excellent idea, darling. Clinton, you're coming too. It'll be a family trip. We haven't all gone somewhere together in ages." I looked at their enthusiastic faces and felt a chill run down my spine. A family trip? After months of a Cold War? It was too good to be true. My grandfather, hearing about the ocean, even perked up a little. He loved the sea. "We'll walk on the beach, Michael," my mother cooed, adjusting his napkin. I remained silent, but inside, everything was screaming. It was a trap. I knew it. I felt it in every cell of my body. But I had no proof. That night, after everyone was asleep, I snuck into my father's office. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I had to find something. My heart was pounding in my chest like a jackhammer. I methodically went through the drawers of his desk, trying not to make a sound. And I found it. In the bottom drawer, under a stack of contracts, lay a glossy brochure. On the cover, beneath a photo of a smiling elderly couple on a perfectly manicured lawn, were the words, "Emerald Meadows. A life of dignity in the golden years." I opened the brochure. Photos of comfortable rooms that looked more like hotel suites, smiling staff in pristine white uniforms, a schedule of activities, art therapy, physical therapy, musical evenings. Everything looked impeccable. A perfect, expensive prison. I flipped the brochure over. On the back was a map with directions. Emerald Meadows was located in the same general direction as the coast, but slightly off the main route. I understood everything. Their plan was diabolically simple. They were going to tell my grandfather we were going to a resort. On the way, they would just stop by for a minute at this place, perhaps under the pretext of checking it out for a friend. And then they would just leave him there. He would be disoriented, scared, and they would easily convince the staff that he was consenting and that it was for his own good. They probably already had an agreement with the administration. I put the brochure back and left the office, feeling sick to my stomach. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a planned, cold-blooded operation to eliminate an inconvenient person. They weren't even going to waste time on arguments or scenes. They had chosen the most cowardly path, deceit. I returned to my room and sat in the dark for a long time. The panic gave way to a cold, ringing rage. I no longer had any doubts. I had to act. There wasn't much time. The trip was scheduled for Saturday. I had 2 days to figure out how to save my grandfather. I looked at my phone. In my contact list was a number I hadn't used in years. Sam, my grandfather's old friend from Rosewood. I didn't know if he would help, but he was my only hope. I didn't call. I sent a short message. Sam, it's Clinton, Michael's grandson. I need help urgently. It's very serious. Can I call you on Saturday morning? The reply came almost instantly. Of course, kid. Call anytime. That short message was a lifeline in an ocean of despair. Now I had at least a ghost of a plan, and I was ready to see it through to the end. Saturday morning was gray and damp, matching my mood. The house was filled with a bustling, fake cheerfulness. My mother flitted around the kitchen, packing healthy snacks for Grandpa, while my father loaded bags into the trunk of his massive SUV with a businesslike air. Grandpa was unusually quiet, sitting on the living room sofa dressed in a new travel jacket, clutching his wooden hummingbird tightly. It was as if he sensed that this trip was not what it seemed. I had barely slept all night, running different scenarios through my head. My plan was risky and depended on many factors, but it was the only one I had. We left Seattle. I sat in the back seat next to my grandfather. My mother, in the front passenger seat, chirped merrily about how we would breathe the sea air and collect seashells. My father drove silently, his eyes fixed on the road, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. About an hour into the drive, I realized we were approaching the point of no return. The GPS showed an exit ahead that led away from the coast, towards Emerald Meadows. My heart began to beat faster. It was time. Dad, I need to use the restroom, I said as calmly as possible. Can you pull over at the next gas station? My father scowled but nodded. A few miles later, we pulled into a large gas station with a convenience store and a small cafe. When the car stopped, I turned to my grandfather. Grandpa, let's go get some coffee with me. Stretch our legs, I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling. He nodded trustingly. My mother looked at me with suspicion. Clinton, don't take too long. We need to get going. We'll be quick. I threw over my shoulder and helped my grandfather out of the car. We entered the gas station building. I led him past the restrooms to the exit on the other side. Pulling out my phone, I quickly dialed Sam's number. He answered on the first ring. Sam, it's Clinton. We're at the Shell gas station on Highway 90, exit 34. They're taking him to a nursing home by tricking him. I'm with him. I don't know what to do. Stay right there, kid. Sam's voice was calm and firm. Don't go anywhere. I'm on my way. I'll be there in about 2 hours, maybe a little more. Can you handle it? I can handle it, I breathed. I bought us 2 coffees and we sat at a table by the window, from where we could see my parents' car. After 10 minutes, they started to get nervous. My mother got out of the car and walked towards us. Clinton, what's going on? It's time to go, she said, her smile strained. I stood up. We're not going anywhere, I said, looking her straight in the eye. At least, not with you. Her face changed. The smile vanished. What are you talking about? Get in the car, and your grandfather too. At that moment, my father got out of the car. He walked over to us, his face purple with rage. Clinton, I won't repeat myself. Stop this circus. Get in the car now. No. I stood between them and my grandfather, who was watching us with frightened eyes. I know where you're really going. I saw the brochure for Emerald Meadows. You were going to dump him there like a piece of unwanted furniture. For a moment, they froze, their faces giving them away completely. My mother turned pale, and my father clenched his fists. You went through my things, he roared. How dare you? And how dare you do this to your own father? My voice broke into a shout. He's not a piece of furniture you can put in storage when you get tired of it. The argument drew the attention of other customers at the gas station. My father, realizing the scene was getting out of control, tried to grab my arm. "We'll talk about this at home." I stepped back. "I don't have a home anymore. My home is where my grandfather is." He looked at me with a gaze full of hatred. "Then stay here, in this dump. You've made your choice. But remember this, Clinton, there's no going back. You are dead to us." He spun around, grabbed my mother by the arm, and dragged her to the car. They got in, and the SUV screeched away, leaving my grandfather and me standing in the middle of the parking lot. I watched it go, shaking. I had done it. I had burned all my bridges. I was alone, with a sick old man, at a gas station in the middle of nowhere, with a few dollars in my pocket and a phone. My grandfather touched my sleeve. "Are we going home, Clinton?" he asked quietly. I looked into his confused, trusting eyes, hugged him, and said, "Yes, Grandpa. Now we're going home." The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. We sat in the gas station cafe. I bought my grandfather a sandwich that he barely touched. He was scared and disoriented after the scene with my parents. He kept asking where Richard and Eleanor were, and I gently told him they had left on business and we were waiting for a friend. I didn't want to traumatize him again with the details. I felt drained and, simultaneously, free. The decision was made. The Rubicon had been crossed. Fear of the future mingled with relief that the nightmare was over. When an old, battered Ford pickup truck pulled into the parking lot, my heart skipped a beat. Sam got out. He was a stocky man in his 70s, with a weathered face, kind eyes, and hands that knew the value of hard work. He saw us through the window and headed straight for us. "Michael," he said, approaching our table, his voice full of genuine joy and concern. My grandfather looked up, and for the first time in a long while, a coherent smile appeared on his face. "Sam, what brings you here?" "Just thought I'd check on you, you old coot," Sam said, giving him a friendly pat on the shoulder. "And you must be Clinton." He extended his huge, shovel-like hand to me. His handshake was firm and honest. "Thank you for coming," I said, feeling a lump form in my throat. I didn't know what else to do. "You did the right thing, kid," he said, looking at me with respect. "Family isn't who you're born to. It's who won't leave you behind. Come on, I'll take you home." The drive to Rosewood took another hour. My grandfather, now next to his old friend, calmed down and even dozed off in the passenger seat, clutching his wooden hummingbird. I sat in the back and briefly told Sam the whole story, about Grandpa's move, the party, Emerald Meadows. Sam listened in silence, just gripping the steering wheel tighter. When I finished, he said, "I always knew your father had a calculator for a heart. But to stoop to this, Michael didn't deserve that." Arriving in Rosewood was like returning to another world. A small town nestled in greenery, with neat, single-story houses and a main street that housed the post office, a grocery store, and a couple of cafes. Everything breathed peace and simplicity. Sam's house was the same, simple, wooden, with a cozy porch and a garden out back. His wife, Mary, a short, smiling woman, greeted us at the door. She immediately hugged my grandfather and led him inside, telling him she had just baked his favorite apple pie. The contrast with the cold, sterile luxury of my parents' home was staggering. There, it was the appearance of care. Here, it was the substance. There, it was designer interiors. Here, it was the warmth of a hearth. Sam showed me to a guest room. "Make yourself at home, Clinton. Stay as long as you need. Michael's house is empty, but he needs time to settle in. You're safe here." That evening, we sat in the kitchen, drinking tea and eating pie. My grandfather, exhausted from the day's events, was already asleep. Mary had gone to her room. Sam and I were alone. "What are you going to do now, kid?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "I have almost no money. I need to find a job. And most importantly, I need to take care of Grandpa. He needs care, doctors." "We'll sort out the job," Sam said confidently. "Rosewood can always use a good mechanic. And as for Michael, we'll manage. All of us, together. The main thing is he's home again, among people who love him. That's the best medicine." I looked at this man, almost a stranger to me, who had come to my aid without hesitation, offering his home and his support. I remembered my father's face, twisted with rage, his words, "You are dead to us." And I understood what Sam had said in the truck. Family really isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the people who show up in your darkest hour and simply say, "We'll manage." The first few weeks in Rosewood were like a slow awakening after a long, painful dream. The quiet of the small town, broken only by the chirping of birds in the morning and the creak of the old swing on Sam's porch, had a calming effect on me. I began to thaw, shedding the shell of tension and constant readiness for a fight that I had worn in Seattle. My grandfather was changing too. In a familiar, friendly environment, he became calmer. The memory lapses didn't disappear, but the panic attacks and anxiety became less frequent. Every day, Sam took him to his carpentry workshop. Grandpa couldn't work anymore, but he could sit on a stool, handle the tools, and give Sam advice, sometimes useful, sometimes completely nonsensical. But he was occupied, surrounded by the familiar smells of wood and varnish, and it brought a piece of himself back to him. I didn't sit idle either. Sam introduced me to the owner of the only auto shop in town, who, after testing my skills, gladly hired me. The pay was modest, but it was enough to live on and to buy my grandfather's medications and good food. I quickly became one of the locals in Rosewood. The people here were simple and open. They knew the story of my arrival from Sam and treated me with quiet respect. No one asked unnecessary questions. They just accepted me as someone who had done the right thing. Of course, my old life didn't let go of me that easily. My phone was blowing up with calls and messages. My mother sent tearful texts full of accusations. "How could you do this to us? We can't sleep at night. We're worried. You've destroyed our family." My father was more pragmatic. He sent short, threatening messages. "Bring him back immediately, or I'll sue you and declare you a kidnapper. You will regret this, Clinton." I read these messages with a cold, detached feeling. They no longer hurt me. Their world, their values, their threats seemed distant and unreal, like a bad movie. I changed my phone number. The only thread connecting me to the past was Sarah. She found me through social media and wrote, "Clinton, Mom and Dad are furious. What happened? I'm worried about you and Grandpa." I replied briefly, "We're fine. He's safe and happy." I didn't want to drag her into this conflict. She had made her choice by staying on their side, and I wasn't going to try to change her mind. A month later, Sam gave me the keys to my grandfather's house. "It's time for you two to return to your nest," he said. "I'll help you get things in order there." The house was small but sturdy, the one my grandfather had built with his own hands. It was neglected, covered in dust, but it was alive. It had Michael's spirit in it. We spent a week cleaning. I scrubbed the floors, fixed a leaking faucet, while my grandfather sat on the porch, watching me with a smile. When we moved his things from Sam's house, he walked into his old bedroom, sat in his rocking chair, looked out the window at the apple tree he had planted many years ago, and said, "I'm finally home." Behind the house stood a large, spacious workshop, cluttered with old boards, tools, and unfinished projects. It was my grandfather's kingdom. One evening, I went in there, turned on the light, and saw an unfinished wooden rocking horse on the workbench. My grandfather had started making it for Sarah when she was little, but never finished it. I picked up a hand plane, blew the dust off it. The wood yielded easily, emitting a warm, resinous scent. And in that moment, I knew what I wanted to do next. I wasn't just going to stay in Rosewood. I was going to revive this place. I was going to bring life back into this workshop. This would be my home, and my way of saying thank you to my grandfather. The decision to turn my grandfather's old workshop into my own garage became not just a business plan for me, but a life's purpose. It was my way of putting down roots in this land that had so graciously welcomed me. I quit my job at the town garage and threw myself into the work. Money was tight, but I had my hands, my knowledge, and the support of Sam, who helped me with advice and old lumber for repairs. I worked from dawn till dusk. I patched the roof, poured a new concrete floor, installed new lighting. My grandfather often sat on a chair by the entrance, watching me. His consciousness often drifted, but sometimes he had moments of surprising clarity. One day, he came up to me as I was trying to level the old workbench, took the spirit level from my hands, and said, "Not by eye, son, by the bubble. Always trust the bubble, not your eyes." This was the same grandfather I knew and loved, wise and precise. One evening, as we sat in the kitchen after a long day's work, Sam came over with a serious look on his face and placed an old, battered folder on the table. "Clinton, I have something to give you," he said. "Michael left this with me for safekeeping a few years ago, when he realized his memory was starting to go. He told me to give it to you when the time was right. I think the time is now." My hands trembled slightly as I opened the folder. Inside were the deeds to the house and land, as well as a will. It was simple, handwritten, but notarized by the local lawyer. It contained only a few lines. My grandfather, Michael, bequeathed all his property, the house, the workshop, and his small savings in a bank account, to me, his grandson, Clinton. I looked up at Sam, unable to speak. Sam smiled sadly. He always said you were the only one in the family made of the same stuff as him. He saw your soul, kid. He believed in you long before all this happened. He knew you wouldn't let this place die. I looked at the will again. It wasn't about the money or the property. It was about trust. At a time when my entire family saw me as a failure and a rebel, my grandfather, whose memory was already beginning to fail him, saw me as his heir. Not by blood, but by spirit. It was the most valuable inheritance I could ever receive. This document freed my hands. I used my grandfather's small savings to buy a used lift and the necessary equipment. I hung a simple wooden sign over the garage doors, which Sam helped me carve, Michael's Motors. I didn't want anything flashy, just the name of the man who taught me everything I valued. The opening was quiet. There were no balloons or champagne. I simply opened the doors one Monday morning. My first customer was Sam, who brought in his old pickup for an oil change. Then the neighbors came by. Word spreads fast in a small town, and soon I had a line of customers. People liked that I worked honestly, didn't upsell them on unnecessary services, and could fix things that other places wouldn't even touch. I had found my niche, my place in this world. In the evenings, I cared for my grandfather. His condition was slowly but steadily deteriorating. He increasingly confused day and night, talking to shadows on the wall. But he was calm. He was home. Sometimes I would wheel his rocking chair into the workshop, and he would just sit there, listening to the sound of the tools, a faint smile on his face. He was in his own world, but it was a world filled with familiar sounds and smells. I knew he was happy, and looking at him, at my workshop, at the stars above the rosewood sky, I felt completely at home for the first time in my life. I had paid a high price for it, but it was worth it. Nearly 2 years passed. 2 years of a quiet, measured life, woven from the smell of gasoline, the sound of wrenches, and the peaceful breathing of my grandfather in his chair by the window. My shop, Michael's Motors, had become an integral part of Rosewood. I knew almost every car in town, and their owners knew me. I became not just a mechanic to them, but one of their own. Clinton, Michael's grandson, the one who came home. My grandfather's health was fading like a candle in the wind. His world had shrunk to the confines of our small house. He barely spoke anymore, and his eyes, once clear and full of mischief, now stared into the void, seeing something inaccessible to me. Caring for him became my second job. I learned everything. How to change his diapers, feed him with a spoon, understand his needs from the slightest twitch of an eyebrow. It was not a burden to me. Every day spent with him was a gift. I remembered how he had cared for me when I was a child, how he taught me to tie my shoes and carve from wood. Now it was my turn to repay the debt. It was not a debt of duty, but a debt of love. The most precious moments were the rare ones when the fog in his mind lifted. One day, I was sitting next to him on the porch, cleaning the carburetor from an old motorcycle. He was silent for a long time, and then he suddenly reached out his weak, trembling hand and placed it on my shoulder. "Good work, son," he whispered. His voice was barely audible, but it was filled with pride. I froze, afraid to move and break the spell. I looked up, and our eyes met. For one brief moment, it was him, my grandfather, Michael, strong, wise, and loving. I smiled at him, a lump in my throat. "Thanks, Grandpa," was all I could manage to say. He passed away on a quiet April morning. The sun was just beginning to fill the room with light, dancing on dust motes in the air. I went in to give him his morning medicine and knew instantly that he was gone. He lay in his bed, perfectly calm, with a peaceful expression on his face. In his hand, he clutched the small wooden hummingbird. It was as if he had flown away with it in his final, brightest dream. I sat on the edge of his bed, took his cold hand in mine, and cried. They were quiet tears, tears of sadness and gratitude. I cried because he was gone, and I thanked fate for the honor of being with him until the very end. I had kept my promise. He did not die alone in a sterile room in an expensive prison. He died at home, in his own bed, surrounded by love. I called Sam and Mary. They came immediately, bringing with them a sense of peace and sympathy. Mary hugged me, and Sam just stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder. His silent support was more eloquent than any words. The funeral was modest, like his entire life. We gathered at the small local cemetery on a hill overlooking Rosewood. It was just me, Sam and Mary, and a dozen other locals who had known and respected Michael. No grand speeches, no expensive wreaths. Just quiet sorrow and fond memories. I did not inform my parents. I felt no anger, only emptiness. They had made their choice 2 years ago, erasing him and me from their lives. Their presence here would have been a sham, an insult to his memory. The only message from the past was a small bouquet of white lilies delivered by a courier. Inside was a note in Sarah's hurried handwriting. "I'm sorry. I'm so very sorry. Rest in peace, Grandpa." I placed the bouquet on his grave. Perhaps something had begun to change in her soul. But that was her story now, not mine. After everyone had left, I stood by the fresh mound of earth for a long time. I thought about how my grandfather had left me not just a house and a workshop. He had left me a part of himself. He had taught me that honor, dignity, and love are not empty words. They are a choice you make every day. And now I had to live in a way that was worthy of that lesson. After the funeral, a deafening silence descended upon me. The house, which just yesterday was filled with my grandfather's quiet presence, his breathing, his shuffling footsteps, now seemed empty and hollow. I walked from room to room, mechanically touching his things: the rocking chair, the stack of old Popular Mechanics magazines, his worn-out slippers by the bed. The pain of loss was sharp, but it held no despair. There was a gentle sadness and a sense of completion. I had done everything I could. I had been with him. For a few weeks, I lived in a fog, working in the workshop on autopilot. Sam and Mary dropped by constantly, bringing food, just sitting with me in silence on the porch. They gave me the time and space to grieve. And gradually, day by day, life began to return to its course. But I knew my story wasn't over. There was one last bill to pay, one final conversation that needed to happen. I had to go to Seattle, not to reconcile, not to prove a point, but to put an end to it, to look them in the eyes and close that door forever. I asked Sam to look after the shop, got into my old pickup truck, and drove north. The road that had seemed like a path to nowhere 2 years ago was now just a road. It no longer held any power over me. My parents' house looked exactly the same. The perfect lawn, the gleaming windows, the cold perfection. I rang the doorbell, and my mother opened the door. She had aged. Her always impeccable hair was slightly disheveled, and her eyes held a weariness that no makeup could hide. She flinched when she saw me. "Clinton," she whispered. I walked past her into the living room without a word. My father was sitting in an armchair. He had changed too. His shoulders, always so straight and confident, were slumped, and there was much more gray in his hair. He looked up at me, and his eyes held neither anger nor his former arrogance, only a heavy, bleak exhaustion. "He's gone," I said. It wasn't a question, but a statement. "Yes," I replied. 3 weeks ago, in his sleep, at his home." My mother began to cry silently, covering her face with her hands. My father was silent for a long time, staring at the floor. Then he looked up, and for the first time in my life, I saw tears in his eyes. "I think about it every day," he said in a hoarse, broken voice. "About that day at the gas station. I was wrong, Clinton. I was a blind idiot, obsessed with my career, my image. I lost my father. And then my son. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just stated the facts, passing judgment on himself. And that honesty was more important to me than any apology. I didn't come here to blame you," I said. "I came to tell you that he didn't suffer. He was at peace. And he wasn't alone." I didn't stay long. Our conversation was over. As I stood in the doorway, my mother came up to me. "Will you come back?" she asked hopefully. "My home is in Rosewood," I replied gently. I felt no hatred, only pity. They lived in their gilded fishbowl, and now that the object of their irritation was gone, they were left alone with the emptiness they had created. I returned to Rosewood that same evening. As I drove into town and saw the light on in my workshop, Sam had left it on for me. I felt that I had come home. For real. My story ends here. But my life does not. I still fix cars at Michael's Motors. I've taken on a local kid as an apprentice, just as obsessed with engines as I was. On weekends, I go fishing with Sam. Sometimes, Sarah comes to visit. She dropped out of business school and is now studying landscape design. We don't talk about the past. We're building new bridges. I often sit on the porch, in my grandfather's rocking chair, holding the small wooden hummingbird in my hand. It reminds me that true value is not in what you achieve, but in who you love. Not in what you build, but in what you are willing to protect. My grandfather taught me how to work with my hands. But the most important lesson he ever taught me was how to work with my heart. And that is a legacy I will carry with me for the rest of my life.